Yoso Bhagavan Araham Samma Sambuddho Swakato Yena Bhagavata Dhammo Supatipanno Yasa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Dhammaya Bhagavantam Sadhammam Sasangham Nimei Sakare Yataraham Aruditehi Apipuchayama Sadhuno Bhante Bhagava Suchiraparini Buddhopi Pachima Jagata Dukam Pamanasa Ime Sakare Dukatapana Karavute Pachidanatu Amakan Vikaratan Hitaya Sutaya Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivadehi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami Annamaya Bhuttasva Bhagavato Upapa Kanamakarang Karomase Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Good evening, everyone. We'll meditate now for 45 minutes, and then we'll take a 5-minute break and some Dhamma reflections.
Lokadipati Sahambati Katanjali Anadivaram Ayachata Sandikta Satta Parajatika Jatika Dese Tudhamam Anukampimam Pajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. The party's over. It's time to do. Well, I've had a great time. What you? I think we have some happy customers. How's the ankle? Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, much gratitude for inviting me to teach.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you. I learned a lot. Teaching is interesting because it's quite a creative process. Because you have some insight, and you have the teaching, and then you have culture, and all those different elements, and then, okay, First of all, do I know what I'm talking about? And my first teacher said, if you can't write it down, you don't know it. You can't write it out. And my sense of it, for me personally, if I can't speak it out, I don't know it. Right? You see similar kind of thing. So the teaching helps me clarify both my own confidence and my own doubt. Like what do I know that I know, and what do I know that why am I not sure about that? So it's a very, very helpful, reflective process. So I am a work in process. Progress, something like that. So today, I thought I wanted, because we are in a Christian center, I thought I'd read something from Thomas Merton first. So everyone knows Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a famous trappist monk from New York City. He was a journalist, and he had a conversion to Catholicism. Surprising, he was quite cynical journalist in New York, and he was still a journalist as a monk because he just kept journals. He was a great writer, and I enjoyed reading him when I was a younger monk. And to be honest, I probably understood about 30% what he was talking about, because I didn't understand Christian theology. But that kind of didn't matter, because I thought he was a great man. And there was something about his words just moved me in a way that I didn't have to figure out. Do you find that? Like a lot of reading, like Rumi. What are you talking about? But I like it. and there's a place for that, I think. For me, there is. So Thomas Merton, you might know the story that in the early days at Gethsemane, he was the novice master, and he attracted so many young men that they didn't have enough room. Like, I think the population of the monastery increased from like 20 to 200 or something really quite astounding. And then his abbot was quite strict. And the Trappist monks take vows of, among others, they take vows of stability, so they can't move. And he was doing a lot of publishing and writing. Didn't get on with the abbot. When the abbot died, a new abbot came, was much more simpatico to Thomas Merton's energies. And there was a conference in Bangkok, and Merton asked, could I go to that conference? And sure. And that was his great Asian journey, from which he wrote the Asian Journal. But before that, he was having a very fruitful conversation with, among others, D.T. Suzuki. There's a great Zen scholar. And they wrote one of the last books that was published from Merton was the Zen and the Brutes of Appetite. Great title. And I think it kind of opens like, and they were like, there was a dialogue they were having, but it was like a series of essays. Merton and D.T. Suzuki, Merton, like that. And one of Merton's lines was, Zen is not of benefit to anyone because there is no one. So then, and his understanding of Buddhism is very rich. And his understanding of Catholicism was very rich. And that's why I think I liked reading him, because it was something different that I knew about Christianity. You could sense it in him. So on this Asian journey, he visited, he saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he saw the Karmapa that was there at that time. He met Prakanti Palo, he met Walpora Hula, he met Chungyam Trungpa, a whole series of superstars from that age, as it were, that I'd heard about, right? And weren't so far from my life, because I met Prakanti Palo too. So in that, the trip to Sri Lanka, he then visited the shrine, the great rock carvings in Polonnaruwa. And I was there with Lompo Sumero, Lompo Pasno, Janasoko, 4 of us. And hundreds of police. But that's another story. We had a police escort all through Sri Lanka. We hadn't done anything wrong. They were taking care of us. It was really bizarre but wonderful. So we were there, and it's one of Luang Por Sumedho's most favorite shrines, Buddhist shrines. And there's a rock cliff that goes down to like this. If this were the rock face, and so there's kind of a rock ledge, a rock ledge that goes down, and there's sand, and then there's a reclining Buddha. What do you think? Is it about 100 feet long? It's massive, isn't it? It's 100 feet long, carved into the rock, and it's beautiful art. You know, it's really. And then there's a standing figure with folded arms, which he says is Venerable Ananda, and recently the archaeologists have changed it to the Buddha, but whatever. It's a very, very interesting posture because it's kind of it's kind of different. And then there's another two Buddhas carved into that rock face. So it's really very spectacular. So I took the policeman carried Luang Por Sumedho's wheelchair because his balance is bad. 4 policemen carrying him onto this rock ledge. And then we just sat there meditating in front of the this beautiful statues. So Merton did the same thing, and this was his. And he had what I guess in Zen you'd call it a satori experience, and this was what he wrote about it. I'm able to approach the Buddhas barefoot and undisturbed, my feet in wet grass, wet sand. Then the silence of the extraordinary faces, the great smiles, huge and yet subtle, filled with every possibility, questioning nothing, knowing everything, rejecting nothing. The peace not of emotional resignation, but of madhyamika, of sunyata, that has seen through every question without trying to discredit anyone or anything, without refutation, without establishing some other argument. For the doctrinaire, the mind that needs well-established positions, such peace, such silence can be frightening. I was knocked over with a rush of relief and thankfulness at the obvious clarity and fluidity of shape and line, the design of the monumental bodies composed into the rock shape and landscape, figure, rock, and tree, and the sweep of bare rock sloping away on the other side of the hollow, where you can go back and see different aspects of the figures. Looking at those figures, I was suddenly almost forcibly jerked clean out of the habitual half-tied vision of things, and an inner clearness, clarity, as if exploding from the rocks themselves, became evident and obvious. The queer evidence of the reclining figure, the smile, the sad smile of Ananda standing with arms folded, much more imperative than Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, because completely simple and straightforward. The thing about all this is that there is no puzzle, no problem, and really no mystery. All problems are resolved and everything is clear, simply because what matters is clear. The rock, all matter, all life is charged with Dharmakaya. Everything is emptiness and everything is compassion.
Wow.
You know, it's but you know, filled with every possibility, questioning nothing, knowing everything, rejecting nothing. The peace not of emotional resignation, but of sunyata, that is seen through every question, without trying to discredit anyone or anything, without refutation, without establishing some other argument. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one. And oftentimes in Buddhism, you'll find this combination of emptiness and compassion. Emptiness and compassion. And yeah, you find that often. So that's to honor our Christian brothers and sisters. So what do I want to do? I want to, you know, there's one one phrase I don't think I've used at this retreat, the rephrasing of the Four Noble Truths. The mind going outside is the problem. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. So it's a reformulation of the Four Noble Truths. And one becomes two and two. That kind. So the mind going outside is the problem. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. And so I've been using words like preoccupation and availability, that kind of language. And so this is a bit complicated, so bear with me. So this is Jean Klein sort of takes you to that in this piece. So let's see if this works. Perhaps you find yourself at a bus stop, looking at someone who strikes you as especially nervous or impatient. It interests you very much. You simply look and you observe that the more the nervousness is articulated, the more relaxed you find yourself. When you come more and more to absolute silent observation, you uncover more and more of the observed. So far, so good? Do that again. Perhaps you find yourself at a bus stop, looking at someone who strikes you as especially nervous or impatient. It interests you very much. You simply look and you observe that the more the nervousness is articulated, the more relaxed you find yourself. When you come more and more to absolute silent observation, you uncover more and more of the observed. At first, the observed is emphasized, but your observing faculty is so strong that you are taken by it and you feel yourself in a dimension of stillness that you never experienced before. It is very important. Now, when observation becomes more and more relaxed and memory does not come in, we really look at something. Then attention automatically unfolds and becomes increasingly without tension. There is no expectation. There is no anticipation. We find ourselves in an observation which is completely dimensionless. So far, so good. Okay. Real observation is a very important faculty, which we must learn. Generally, observation is polluted by memory and thoughts, comparison, judging, and so on. When the observer remains as the controller, when he looks to take something of the observed, then the observer can never discover itself. So now he's kind of moving the mind, knowing the mind, as you see. Yeah? Real observation is innocent observation, where no one is observing and there is no intention. Observation is welcoming, is openness. So this is, this idea of receptivity. Observation is welcoming, is openness. In sustaining this openness, open alertness, there is a moment when the energy from the observed, free from all will, from all obtaining, goes back to the observer. Then there is no more eccentric energy, the mind going outside. That's what he means by eccentric. Okay, it's stay with me.
Sorry, what was the part about then the observed sends out?
Observation is, that one's a hard to understand. Just keep going with me here. Observation is welcoming. Observation is welcoming, is openness. In sustaining this openness, open up, just let your mind don't try to figure it out. Just let it kind of just take it in. In sustaining this openness, open alertness, there is a moment when the energy from the observed, that's what you're talking about, free from all will, from all obtaining, goes back to the observer. Then there is no more eccentric energy going out. It comes back, I would say it becomes concentric. And when the energy comes back in a concentric movement, then the observer knows itself in the observing faculty. Then there is a feeling of expansion, and you live in intelligence and sensitivity. So that's one way of talking about the mind knowing the mind. Once more, that last paragraph. Real observation is a very important faculty, which we must learn. Generally, observation is polluted by memory and thoughts, comparison, judging, and so on. When the observer remains as the controller, when he looks to take something of the observed, then the observer can never discover itself. So hence non-desire. As long as there's that desire, it's always the controller trying to get something, right? Real observation is innocent observation, where no one is observing and there is no intention. That's very hard. and just to and that's why I think Buddhism uses non-desire, because desire is what the intentionality of our act is based on trying to get something or get rid of something. In sustaining this openness, open alertness, there is a moment when the energy from the observed, free from all will, from all obtaining, goes back to the observer. Then there is no more eccentric energy. It comes back, I would say it becomes concentric. And when the energy comes back in a concentric movement and the observer knows itself in the observing faculty, then there is a feeling of expansion and you live in intelligence and sensitivity. And I would say that's what happened to Merton. Those things exploded into him, as it were, because this is what awe does. This is what religious awe does. Your mind just stops. You're no longer constructing anything around it. The last bit's difficult, but these ideas of observation having like a purity of intention, non-desire, non-becoming, these are really good. This good language to bring up in your meditation, and that's a part of Sammasankappa. Functional observation. You want to get something out of it. You observe the milk in order to, but it doesn't boil over. Yeah, you want to get something out of it. But to actually observe in this kind of pure way, you're interested in the mind knowing the mind. That's what it's doing. So one of the things I haven't talked about in terms of desire, bhava tanha and vibhava, I haven't talked about kama tanha. And kama tanha is attachment to sensual desire. And what is sensual desire? What's attachment to it? Well, think about resentment. We talked about that the other day. So something untoward happens to you, which is immoral or cruel or whatever, and you get hurt by it. You process the rage. You process the desire for revenge. You get through all that. It takes you 3 years or whatever. And then there's still the memory of resentment coming up. And now the memory of resentment is a sense experience, right? And then you find yourself really getting back caught up in the memory, and you're just thinking about this and you're just really complaining about this person or whatever. And then your friend says to you, you're really making a meal of this. Now, attachment to sense desire is consumption, consuming something. And you can see it. We have it in our language. You're making a meal of this, Viradhammo. And just let go. Yeah, but they did this to me and they did that. Now, that kind of making a meal of something is very much our consuming of thoughts. Whether it's a kind of lovely fantasy of something delightful or a horrible consideration of something that might happen, or some memory, or just the kind of Walter Mitty stuff. Did you study Walter? Remember Walter Mitty? Didn't ever do that. It's just kind of blah, blah, blah in the mind. That's all consuming experience, the experience of thought, and the sense of self in it. And that preoccupation is placing emphasis on the consumption rather than the observer. So then you get into the bind of then trying to not consume and try to get rid of it, right? And that doesn't work either, because you're not really concerned about the observer. You're still concerned about the observed thought. So the mind is just always in the wrong place. So the mind going outside is the problem. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. That's a very simple model to start to use in your meditation. So then the mind knowing the mind. Well, what is that? And what is the mind knowing the mind? Well, there's so many ways that it's talked about Buddhism, like knowing that you know. You're sitting here, and you know that you know. What do you know? No. It's not about the object. You just know that you know. And then you can become curious about consciousness itself, or knowing, or observing, whatever language you have. And that curiosity, I think, is the spiritual aspiration we have. The other is our psychological needs, and our physiological needs, and our social needs, and all that. So we spend a lot of time concerned about those matters too. But to actually be concerned in this way about the silence of the mind, and everyone, like any teacher you read, they're really emphasizing, try not to make a comment. try to just be here before you think about it, before you analyze it. And that's a very alluring thought, because but the problem with this, and you try to get rid of thought. Every now and then thought stops. You say, I've got it, but you've thought. So like a split second. And so, like, how would you, in your own practice, how would you encourage no thought? Encourage it rather than tyrannize yourself about the thoughts you have. Because thoughts are natural. They're not wrong. First question I asked at Luang Por, I remember, I was a summoner in the Patimokkha. How can I get rid of all this thinking, Luang Por? It's just driving me nuts. And he's like, well, a thought's natural. Don't make it a problem. Oh. Really? But then Ajahn Sumedho says, my mind was so obsessed when I first came to the monasteries that I had to stay in the present moment. I just had to do the mantra, let go, let go, let go, let go, let go. I just had to fill my mind with that. So who's right? Right? Well, both are right. Both are right. And what is needed is skillful means, right? And skillful means is the capacity to kind of understand where the coagulations take place in the mind, and then making efforts, but not with the effort to become or get rid of, because then it's not based on tanha. So if I were to do a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Iti Piso Bhagava, Iti Piso Bhagava, Iti Piso Bhagava, I could do that as a parrot and lose mindfulness after 3 recitations. I could do that with an attempt to block out thought, and because I hate thought, or I could just do it mindfully. Tipiso Bhagava Araham Samma, just mindfully. And that would ground me in intention to do something well. Now, I would get bored very quickly, right? And to pursue that for a long period of time would be difficult. And then my mind would go off again. So any technique you take, usually the novelty of it's great. Like, yeah, this is a good one. I like this one. The novelty wears off after at least one sitting, and then you're back to habit. So the determination to awaken to thought, I think, is so terribly important. To awaken to the thought as an object, and then the skill of say knowing the mood, and the skill of not going there, not repressing it. It's a complicated skill, because thought is very complicated. There's sort of many aspects of it, and if you understand that this gateway to the spiritual side of our being is always in the present moment, that's very important, because then you're not looking for something, you're just doing practices to stay here now. Right? And the intersection of times with time. And if you get that right, then you'll see the difference between doing like a recitation mindfully as opposed to just consuming worrying thoughts. It's different. Consuming worrying thoughts is not mindful. It's just habit, just consumption. But actually saying something to likely, this is what should be done. To actually say that deliberately and carefully 20 times is a very, very healthy exercise because it's got good values in it, but it's hard to do. And even like we memorize a lot of chants, and quite often we can chant them if they're in their sequence, but take something out of the sequence. That's how memory works. And that's just parroting, literally, figuratively, literally. But actually, like deliberately saying, this is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright. That's a very deliberate and wholesome way to compose the mind. And having done that, if you do that, you're using thought now. You're trying to get rid of thought, but you're using thought in a good way. Then first of all, that recitation will come up through the day. Those values will come up through the day. That's why the monks of yore memorize things. And nowadays we still memorize things. So you memorize lists or whatever, or some aspect of a sutra, and then it comes up. It comes up. Whereas if you just look it up on Wikipedia, right? You know, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And then you go to the next one. There's no real strength to that. It's just another bit of information. So we don't want like the teaching, like so whatever aspect of the teaching you take, you don't want to just be another bit of information that you just bone up on before the exam, write it down and forget 2 hours later. But you want to really get it deeply into your psyche, and that's through memorization. Memorization is very, very helpful. Thomas Merton, he's got a very good memory. And every now and then he'll come up with a kind of Swinburne poem. He likes Swinburne, very kind of over the top Victorian type. But he loves it, you know, and he'll just kind of come up with this, where'd that come from? And then some monks have a really good facility for it. But just in terms of like the study part of Buddhism, the structures are very good. The Four Noble Truths are very, very good. They're very consistent. And if you go through the task of just memorizing the basic structure of the Four Noble Truths, that there is suffering has to be understood, suffering has been understood. There is the cause of suffering, that cause has to be abandoned, it has been abandoned, that causes attachment to desire. And there's the realization that suffering has ended. This has to be realized. And there's the path to be developed, has to be developed. You get that formulation, you write it down and you memorize it, and you do it a lot. This is what monastics do. Then it starts to come up in consciousness and becomes the framework for your reflective mind. And that's very helpful because there is so much good information now in terms of teachings. It is helpful to have one set of principles that you know quite well. You can bring others into that, but if it's just a kind of dilettantish smorgasbord of celery and carrots or whatever you have, then you've not really done the intellectual work. There's an intellectual rigor which is necessary because intellect is very, very powerful, but that's not just accumulating lots of information. It's like sitting down with like Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, why the three characteristics, where does it all fit, and like any like it took me a few years to do that. I was meditating too, but just to do that intellectual work. Wow, what is it? What's the big deal with the dependent origination? It seems complicated. And what's with the three characteristics? And where does that fit into the Four Noble Truths? And so on. And so and where does that fit into the deathless? So I found that very, very helpful. Just doing the kind of grunt intellectual work, seeing it through and then asking and having my own doubts. And then intellectually I say, okay, yeah, this is of a piece. This is all of one piece. It all makes sense. And it makes sense in terms of the unconditioned. This is why this language is there. Desire for conditions would take you away from the unconditioned in this language that we use. And so then the intellectual doubts that one might have, they're very much undermined. Then it's just emotional doubts. You kind of, you know the project, you know how to do it. And then those other kinds of doubts are usually doubts of self-worth, and they're just emotional. They're dealt with in the body. So fellows like me, I don't teach on a kind of academic structured way, and that's why I like old timers, because you've got a background. But a good thing to look at, like, do you have a good sense of like Four Noble Truths and these things, and is it worthwhile to study them and memorize some things? So there were no questions, huh?
Yeah, there were questions.
I never
You didn't
got
get them?
No.
I forgot them, but okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah. We've got another 4 hours.
Something came. The chanting of Itipiso.
Yes,
Remember Malini?
Malini, yes.
There's a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah. I can do it tomorrow too. And yes,
Oh, there isn't tomorrow? You can do that?
tomorrow. There isn't tomorrow. Goodbye forever. I'm sorry, Nisanka, say again.
So we were coming from West Virginia after retreat. I couldn't see the road, the highway. She was in the car. And when I stopped, I can't remember exactly what I did, but we went through the thunderstorm. And at the end, she said she was chanting all the time.
Still, it's good to get off the road. It's trust in Allah and taught your camel. Could you talk more about equanimity? I realized that I misunderstood this concept. Did I talk? Oh, when did this come in?
It just came in today.
Today, right? Let me see. Let's see.
Yeah, let's see.
Hold on. At the end of last year's retreat, you asked us to spend a year looking at resistance to the way things are. That was the homework, right? All right. Teachers give homework. Would you talk about your intention for our learning and the experience of resistance and tips for dealing with resistance? Well, my intention is to get people away from the narratives of their experience and get to something more basic in their understanding of mind. So it's like phenomenology. So I might be resisting the temperature, or I might be resisting the way someone's talking to me, or I might be resisting the pain in my leg, or I might be resisting all manner of things. But all of them would have the common factor resistance or not wanting. So if you generalize, you take a kind of general principle like that, you get a lot of insight. Because then you're not you have the storyline. Yeah, why did they do that? Why did they stop breathing so loud on this retreat or something? You're doing metta bhavana. Stop breathing so loud. I'm doing metta. And that's the narrative with this person. And then I'm doing resistance. Oh, this is resistance to loud noises. What does that feel like? That's dharma. Narrative is not dharma. Narrative is self. So when you take that's why study's good. You take some of those things and you just hit a general principle like resistance, which is vibhava tanha. You would say attachment to resistance would be vibhava tanha in some way. And so then you have like 1/3 of the foreknown of the cause of suffering, and honing it, like simplifying our complicated minds to simple the building blocks of suffering. Let's say that's why I do that. Would you talk about your intention for our learning and the experience of resistance? Yeah, and tips for dealing with resistance. The best tip is to make it conscious. Resistance feels this way, the mind knowing the mind, rather than the mind going outside. So, like if the air conditioner was really noisy and the sound is really noisy and I'm meditating and I'm resisting that, I'm trying to watch the breath and oh gosh, I can't, this horrible meditation, all that sound, that's the mind going outside, that's the cause. I mean, the air conditioner is innocent. No intention to hurt you. So the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside, in this case, because of resistance, is suffering. And then the mind knowing the mind, oh, resistance feels this way, is the end of suffering. Now, that end of suffering might be very brief, because now there's a relationship with the air conditioner, and that will come back. But you've got the key, and then you keep doing it like that. So it's I do that a lot. I just take simple themes in my own practice and just kind of contemplate them. And that's what we're nurturing, is the contemplative mind, rather than the endless story complaining, all the stories that we have in our minds. And contemplation isn't much understood, maybe, I don't know. Analysis, we have a lot of analysis, I think, in our culture, but this ability to step back and contemplate Dharma in a kind of silent way through the teaching. That's why I'm encouraging it. I hear from you that awareness is unchanging, uncreated. It appears to me that there is a sense of permanence in this awareness. How to relate this to the impermanence in the three lakkhana? Well, the three lakkhana, again, three characteristics, that which has the nature to arise has the nature to cease. So that does not say that everything is impermanent. So that's the trick question I was asked. I did that in Malaysia. So. Buddhism says everything is impermanent. True or false? And this looks like a trap. But that's not the teaching. That which has a nature to arise has a nature to cease. So the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed. And when you say permanent, then it always sounds like a thing. This is where language gets very, very difficult. So the neti way of doing things is stop grasping that which changes and see what happens. And so the reference is awareness, and see what happens. And so and when we say about awareness, like the awareness that someone like Luang Por has is the same awareness that I have, but his insight into that is more and more deep and profound. So that's why we'll say it's a gateway, but a gate, like a doorway, participates both in the hallway and this room. Mm-hmm. It's of both, right? If it was different, it couldn't be a gateway. So it participates in both. So the trust and awareness then is saying, yeah, well, that's logically, it can't be a sound. Sound is changing. Can't be a taste. Can't be any sense experience. Can't be an emotion. Can't be. Well, what's left? Well, there's consciousness. There's presence. Okay, what if I investigate that? Well, how do I investigate that? Well, I know that I know, and that's it. Then you have to wait. Wait for nothing. And that's where the enigmas of Zen or other teachings start to come up. But it's not so terribly enigmatic, because if you take the logic of it, the reason the three lakkhana are given by the Buddha, they're not just like a physics thing. You know, it's not arbitrary that, oh, physics is like this. No, there's a reason he lays that teaching out, so that, because he does realize, he does realize this ultimate peace. And he says, well, if you want to check this out, if you want to realize this, don't look in the wrong place. So it's not just a kind of Buddhist theory that you write out. It has a purpose, it has a function. If that which has a nature to rise as your nature to cease, well, there can't be any permanent essence, self in it. And hence, it's unsatisfactory because it's not permanent. So happiness is unsatisfactory. And that you have to understand in relationship to the Buddha's realization. Happiness is not unhappiness. That would be silly. Happiness and comforts will always want that. But don't look for what the Buddha realized in happiness. But certainly be happy. Right? And what is happiness is generosity and compassion and a nice retreat. Right? Do all that. So remember that there is a way out of impermanence, and the lakkhana are pointing to that, the kind of wrong place to look. The detailed sensing and the guided meditation of the body's organs by sections has been helpful grounding in the city. This is from Ottawa. Imagination, the mind's eye, fill the map out with the brainstem and vertebrae. Is there a reason in this guided meditation for leaving out to our imaginations or otherwise? Just wondering. Well, I'm an aphantasy. I wouldn't know. No, I think it's because thought and imagination makes it more complex, makes it more busy. So the idea here is you have a very simple, and also because our identity with the body, strong. I am like what you like. Quite often, people are living kind of from their heads and observing life from their heads. And this observation is you try to see that the body is in awareness, and it's like awareness is almost behind you. So it's a way of dismantling this strong identity with I am the body. This is who I really am. Well, actually, body is in consciousness, and that's a radical way to start perceiving life. So it's not the same as a belief. You know, it's not, well, how could that be? That's more thought. It's more like just try that perception. And how can you try that perception? Well, you just have to try it, be quiet and try it, and then see what happens. So that's the idea. But also, and that's why they have no thought, no imagination, just to keep it more quiet and more centered on the body. Oh, there's only 20 more. Okay. So I wish to let you know that the guided meditation done on the 17th, Friday morning, worked well for me when I was doing standing for the full instruction period. So you can try standing. Oh. Could you offer reflections on birding? I don't know. Here's the thing. I was in Devon, and there's a friend of a friend, and who was this avid birder, and she was on a retreat somewhere where it was a new place for her, and she's such a birder she couldn't meditate because it was like a new environment. I just got to get out there with my field glasses. She was so into it. But I think for me, like Nick introduced me to birding and the love of nature. There is I think it's an aspect of mudita that because I'm not a birder that takes lists, right? Check it off and go to South Carolina, get another one. I'm not into that. And like to just say it's just a robin. I mean, every robin's fantastic, right? So there is the beauty of bird life. There's just the neatest critters. So I think for me it's an aspect of mudita, gladness. And there is anyone that does birding, you do it for a while and you can see the slightest movement and you know it. I mean, that's just magical, isn't it? How perception can be trained to see something. But for me, it would be the whole idea of mudita, just the beauty in nature, the colors, the shapes, the sounds, and like for me now, being in Ontario is lovely because this is where I grew up, and I was away from 69 to 2001. I mean, I came for a visit. It's a long time. But then now, like the smell of the mornings, right? And the crickets in August. And I've thought a lot about that. We are grounded in the places that we have consumed in a good way, right? The air and the sounds. And there's something very reassuring about that. And this is my place, but not in an egotistical sense, more in the sense of I am a part of nature, and the water and the sound all are reminiscent of that, like the color blue or green, right? And you just look at it and say, yeah, that's my color. I've been with it for 75 years. Or the snowscapes, right, on Pike Lake when it's all frozen and the vast blue skies, and I find them really, really uplifting. And that's that fourth divine possibility of gladness, which is different than having a chocolate eclair. That's sensual desire, and that gladness fades quickly, right? Whereas like just being in a big open sky, you can be that for a long time. Because there's a sense of not being separate from that, I think, it gets a sense of self, and the mind starts to quiet down, and there's this sort of emptiness of mind. And yet you can walk away from it, right? And not needing another one. Because it nurtures you in a way that like a sense experience doesn't. You finish one movie and then it's potato chips and then yogurt, then another movie. That sense, that's consumption. But I think our connection to nature isn't a consumptive, is that a word? Isn't a consumer kind of experience. It's different, isn't it? And that's why the Buddha recommended, well, one of the reasons to live in forests and live in natural abodes and so on. So city life, what was that junction that was really bad?
Maryville and Baseline.
Maryville and Baseline is not like that. and there you have to guard your senses, unfortunately. So I guess it's about gladness, yeah.
It's a note, not a question.
Oh, great. Thank you. And that one more about equanimity. What I said everything. Right. So more about equanimity. Okay. What more? The worldly winds. That's one way you talk about it. That the worldly winds are praise and blame, fame and infamy, good times, bad times, good health, bad health. They're the polarity of our embodied existence. and they just blow how they want to blow. The world, they call it the worldly winds. And so one of the ways we talk about equanimity is how can you find a peaceful coexistence within that natural up and down flux of. I've been reading about a Swedish textile designer who worked in she died in 1941, so the first half of that century. She's a fabulous genius textile artist and a great carpet weaver, and she's one of the kind of national icons of Sweden. And she created a workshop for weavers, hand weavers, but the looms are like the 2 or 3 women on one loom, and with Swedish design and flat weave, kind of beautiful designs. And she was very, very famous and well known, and Frank Lloyd Wright praised her, and then she had exhibits all over the world, and now if you look online for, like, if you, like, her workshop's still going. If you order one of the carpets, it takes a year to make, 40,000 smackers.
Wow.
For you, 39. But anyway, why I bring this up is that she's very, very successful, and also she employed a lot of some of the best weavers in Scandinavia, who were great designers in their own right. And then the war came, and Sweden wasn't involved in the war. Well, it was, but the Germans didn't invade Sweden. But the desire for luxury carpets fell away, and the business collapsed. And then she died in 1941 in the war of cancer. And I just thought, why is this woman? She works so hard and gave so much to her culture and also employment to so many people, or like Stradivarius, his workshops only lasted. His son took it over, and then it dissolved after that. Too much competition. Stradivarius. Who would think, right? And so, the worldly winds are like that. You get, like, people work very hard, and then the worldly winds come and take it all away, sickness. And so equanimity, the kind of classic reflection is, have you got refuge? Have you got refuge in your heart when things change in a minor or major way? Have you got refuge to take the buffeting of the winds and the storms and the hurricanes of life? Because it happens. So that's a good way to look at it. And what we're trying to do really is actually come to that in very refined ways. Because, unless someone really had some terrible trauma just before they came, which does happen too, or some trauma's coming up, whatever, we're doing it in very, very refined ways. And the more you refine equanimity, the more you get this possibility of going beyond the worldly dharmas to the transcendent, to say, like why does Thomas Merton come to Polnarua and his mind is literally blown away, as it were, because he did 30 years work. You get like these Zen stories where the Zen monk is in the Zen garden, and he gets whacked in the head by a piece of bamboo, and he's alive. So you go around doing this. But why? Because there was preparation, there was contemplation, there was continual letting go of worldly dharmas and letting go of consuming thoughts and so on. And then there's a kind of magical, and you read that a lot in spiritual literature, don't you? How these beings come to these possibilities. Okay, I think that's sufi.
Mandamayang dhammo vadakatha sadhukaranda dhamase sadhu sadhu sadhu.
finish with the 4 divine abidings. Page 43. I will abide pervading one quarter with a heart imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a heart imbued with compassion. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a heart imbued with gladness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a heart imbued with equanimity. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Do you need to make any announcements to these folk? Or?
I don't think so. Well, it'll unfold tomorrow.
Okay.
They know it starts at 9 instead of 8:30.
Okay, good. All right, we'll finish with the closing homage. Araham Samma Bhagavan Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi Sawakatua Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanoa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami